Today I'm working on a Colonial piece of hardware that's called a Shutter Dog. It's basically just a rotating bracket and it's designed to keep window shutters open. Most windows had two shutters, so you would mount one of these on either side of the window and they would prevent a wind gust from blowing the shutter closed. The Shutter Dog rotates around so you can get the shutter in place behind the dog, and the lower half of the Shutter Dog is heavier, so it naturally wants to stay in a vertical position. I'm going to be making both halves of the Shutter Dog from 3/8 inch square bar. I'm going to start by rough forging the pivot pin for the Shutter Dog. I'm going to forge a rough taper on the end of the bar, and then I'm going to create the shoulder with a file. You don't need to have a perfectly round pin or a shoulder that's the full size of the bar for this to work just fine. So I'm a little bit further along here. The pin is fairly round, and you can see how the transition is quite large between the main part of the bar and the pin. So I'm just going to pick a spot that's halfway up that slope and file in a rough shoulder. Now I'm ready to start forging the actual working part of the Shutter Dog. What I'm forging here is a pretty standard shape, but if you had a little bit more technical skill and you wanted to show off a little, you would make it a lot more ornate. So you find these in all shapes and sizes. Now I'm getting ready to forge the bottom half of the Shutter Dog. I'm going to be using a longer length of bar here because the bottom half has to be noticeably heavier than the top half. You'll also notice that I've created two offsets that are fairly close together. That extra bit of material in the middle of those two offsets I'm going to need later on to make the pivot for the Shutter Dog. And this is another example of how you have to plan ahead sometimes and create a custom bar stock that you're going to need to forge the shape that you're after. So I'm going to keep drawing this bar out until I have a long tapering point, and then I'm going to curl that up into a pretty simple scroll. Now that I have all the rough forging done, I can use my cross peen to shape that pivot area. And of course, they don't always come out quite the way you want it, so the only way to refine this shape at this point is to get in there with a pair of curved scrolling tongs and just tweak it into the right shape. I like this curved design because you can see the whole scroll as you're working on it. Now I'm ready to do the final assembly. You'll find a lot of theories about, how long to cut rivets and, that sort of thing, but this is just a country project, so all you need to do is to cut the rivet a little bit longer than the diameter of the pin and just rivet a crude head on it. All you're looking for is something that'll keep the shutter dog from pulling off the end of the bar, and you want it sloppy enough so that it can free itself as it starts to rust. And as always, I'm using a very light hammer and I'm taking my time with this. If you find that the rivet is starting to work harden or just resist the hammering, you can throw the whole thing back in the fire, bring it up to a red heat, and then let it cool slowly and continue the riveting. So you're looking for a nice dome shape on the top of the rivet, and you, of course, want to make sure that it doesn't bind the shutter dog together. So if you happen to rivet it a little too much, put it back in the fire and just spin it around to free it up.